Welcome, everybody, to episode 4 of Shout Out from the Hilltop. I'm Todd Peters, your host, and today our special guest is Gloria Coste de Falk. Welcome, Gloria.
Hi.
How you doing today?
I'm doing good.
First question. So for those of you who don't know, Gloria is the head of our world language department. Start by telling everybody, how did you find yourself into the world languages? What brought you there?
I have always loved the Spanish language. My mom speaks Spanish and her whole side of her family speaks Spanish. And so growing up, I always wanted to know the secret code. I wanted to break the code and figure out, because my dad didn't speak Spanish. And so I knew my mom and my grandma were talking about something good, because every time he would walk in, they would talk about something. And I would always think, I wonder what they're talking about. So I was just very curious and nosy. And so I started to learn it in high school, just like how I teach kids at West Catholic. I learned by going to school. My mom grew up in the 50s, and it was a time in which she was looked down on for speaking another language. And so she didn't want her daughters to have an accent. She just didn't want them to have that prejudice against them. And so I've always loved the language. And so when it came time to decide what was I going to do when I grow up, when I was at college, actually, I turned towards education. I just had always been tutoring people, and I just thought it would be cool that one day I could teach someone another language and be able to travel with students and to open up different worlds to my students.
Was there ever a moment that when you first started learning it, when it all clicked, that you surprised your mom by catching what she was saying?
Oh, yeah. There were times that she figured out that I knew what was going on by my body language. And she was like, oh, no, my secrets are out. I can't do it anymore. And it really wasn't anything bad. It was about shopping. It was about not letting my dad know how much her and my grandmother had spent at a certain store. And it was silly stuff they were keeping away from him. And in general, when people are speaking language, they are not talking about you. But I just knew from context something was going on, and I needed to know what was happening. So, yeah.
Was it always a desire to learn Spanish, or was there ever other languages that you thought, or that you do know, or that you thought, oh, I would really like to know this language?
I actually studied French in high school and Spanish in high school. And I learned French because my dad was doing his genealogy, and he's from New Orleans, and almost everything, his last name is actually, my last name is Coste, is actually pronounced that way in French. Originally it was pronounced that way. And so when he was looking up his genealogy, he would contact the diocese in Louisiana, and he would get birth certificates or baptism records, that kind of marriage licenses from the different areas in Louisiana, but they would be in French. And so I take those pieces of paper to school, and my French teacher, who was also my Spanish teacher, he spoke both languages. Him and I would sit down and translate and figure it out. So there was a great desire to find out, like, where was my dad from? And we found out his connection to Europe was someone was fighting in a war, in the Spanish-French War. And the Spanish guy was supposed to go back, but his paperwork actually says jump ship. And so that was super exciting. He had fallen in love with a French woman in the French Quarter, and he decided he was going to stay. And that's like the origin of how my dad's family started to live in Louisiana. So there was definitely a desire to learn other languages. I know bits and pieces of Italian and Portuguese, but it's just travel vocabulary, because once you unlock one language, it's really easy to start unlocking other ones. So it's super fun.
Take us into what brought you to West Catholic. What did that look like?
I grew up in Oscoda, Michigan. That's 4 hours away. And I had a couple different colleges I wanted to go to. And I was leaning towards state. I absolutely wanted to go to state. And my dad was like, no, I think Aquinas is a better fit for you. And we really struggled, like my dad and I, for the whole spring semester of senior year, because we were just butting heads about it, because I had gone to U of M and MSU as part of debate camps. I was a big nerd in high school. And I just loved Michigan State. And he finally convinced me, Aquinas is a place for you. I just know it. And so got to Aquinas, it was perfect fit. And I wanted to stick around after I finished my schooling there. You know, I have a degree in Spanish and I can do reading as well, but it was K through 12. I wanted to work in a high school. And so I started to do all those interviews you do right after you graduate. And I did it all summer long. And some of them I felt like, okay, I'm going to work at this school now. And I'm so excited. And then they wouldn't call me back. And I'm like, oh, what am I doing wrong? And so about 6 days before school started, I got a phone call saying, hey, I have the perfect place for you. And I said, okay. So it was my advisor at school. And she said, it's at West Catholic. My kids went there. It's a great school. It's going to be perfect fit for you. It's a small school. It's a Catholic school. You're going to love it. And so I went for the interview. The woman before me, the teacher before me, her husband was a pastor and had gotten a parsonage on the East Coast, and they had to pick up and leave right away. So they were not expecting to have to hire someone. And so I got the interview, and out comes one of my, I wouldn't say a nemesis from college, but a guy from college that studied abroad the same place I did, or similar places to me. And we were always like in the same classes, and he always seemed like prepared for anything. And so when he walked out of West Catholic, the same time I was supposed to be walking in for my interview, I thought, oh, I've lost this job. I'm going to have to sub that first year out of school. Like, this is going to be terrible. And he comes out and he says, I did terrible. And I said, shut up. There's no way you did terrible. You do everything well. And he goes, no, I got so nervous. And so at that point, when I walked in the door, I felt like I have nothing to lose. This guy should have done it. And now this is my chance. And it's like, I became so relaxed. And one person talked to me about that interview who still works at school. And he said, you shot that out of the park. And I was like, that is awesome. But like, I felt like it was just meant to be. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's certain things that you're called to do, and you just happen to be at the right place at the right time, and you're still prepared for it. But that's how it felt like when I walked into that interview. And even when I left, I was like, this seems like this is where I'm going to teach. But then, you know, I got hired, I think, it might have been like 2 days before school started, all the teacher meetings. I had no time to do anything. I didn't even know what textbooks we were using. So it was a rough first year, but it's been great ever since. So
what is like your first big teaching moment that you just always remember?
That's a hard question.
Or just even a big teaching moment, something that just, whether it's like it's one of those days that when you think about it, it just kind of makes you smile. Like that was a big moment in my teaching career.
There's been a couple that have been like that will stick with me for a long time. And most of the teaching moments, like I feel achievement, or I feel good about when like students who struggle really get it. And you can see that light bulb moment. Teachers will talk about a light bulb moment. And I see that in my kids too, when they finally get something and you feel like you were a part of that movement, you know, of them understanding. But for me, it's always been when students write me back later and they'll say, I really loved how ABCD, you did this in the classroom. And it wasn't necessarily what I taught, it was how I made them feel. And a lot of kids will just say, you accepted me for who I was, or you always call me down, or you listen to me, like those type of things, those personal relationships, which I think at the beginning of my career, I was really worried about, like, they have to learn all the Spanish they can. And then as I've been teaching, it's way more like, I'm still teaching Spanish, obviously, but it's more about those forming relationships and watching kids grow as young adults, forming relationships with other people and being kind and thinking about other people from another perspective. So we can be different, but we can still like each other. And I think languages kind of form that type of understanding and education, is that this person over here who lives in Spain lives kind of in the same situation I do, that we go to private school, we do this, we do that, and we're more the same than we are different. And I like those type of teachable moments. So
what would you want to tell the kids right now? Would you want to say anything to the kids?
I definitely would like to say that nobody was prepared for this. The adults who might pretend that they know everything, the students obviously didn't know, children didn't know. And I think we're all, it's the great equalizer. I feel as though everybody is struggling and it's okay. I feel like everyone's trying hard, and I would say that just keep going at it, just one moment at a time, one day at a time, and just to let them know that everybody, no matter what age you are, might have a bad day because of this. Like, we don't have what we find as normal anymore. And I don't know if I'm answering this very well, but just hang in there. I feel like our faith and the things that are important never went away, and to kind of lean on that. For me, it's about getting moment to moment. And some days I can think about what I'm going to do tomorrow. And then other days I can only work at what's right in front of me. And so if you're just aware of those things and you talk to someone, just keep talking. Don't like bottle it up. Then I think we can all make it through this, which I think everyone's doing different things, but we're all really living the kind of the same life right now. So
What's the coolest place that you ever traveled to?
I've been to Morocco. That was the most interesting trip. I got to ride a camel, so that was cool. We went to like the marketplace. You never get to go to a place like that in the States, you know, or even in parts of Europe. That's very distinctive of certain countries. Costa Rica was pretty cool with the size of the insects. Like, they're huge. We thought a spider was a crab, so we were all taking pictures with it. Later, we found out, okay, we can't count. None of us knew biology, but the photographer was like, this doesn't make any sense, but I don't want to panic anybody. The next day, he goes, okay, so I finally looked it up. And we're like, what? And he said, that picture you guys all got of the crab is actually a giant spider. And we're like, what? Like, also been to Rome during like All Souls and All Saints Day. And I remember going with a friend of mine because we were studying abroad, and she was in France and I was in Spain, and we met up in Rome. And we decided we were going to go to, you know, the Vatican. And so we start walking and we're looking at maps, because this is before you had a phone to tell you where to go. So we're like looking at, you know, the map, and I'm figuring it out. And then all of a sudden we realize we're in a parade. And we're with like all these little kids, and they're all dressed kind of different. And I'm like, what is going on? And we're like, oh my gosh, all the schools are, you know, having their kids dress as saints parading into Vatican City for All Souls, All Saints Day. And then there were so many people, we like didn't have to look at the map anymore. We just followed along with the parade. And then we get there, and I was like, it's like the Pope is coming. And the guard who's right next to us, who can speak probably like 18 languages, he looks at us and he goes, well, he is. And we're like, what? So we got to see John Paul II twice that weekend just by accident.
Did you ever think about doing something else besides teaching?
Yes. In high school, I had this general idea that I was going to be a doctor. I just always thought I was going to be, I always felt good in science classes. But the reality of what it takes to be a doctor is very different than what you imagine being a doctor is. And then when I really itemized all of the things that I've done, like service-wise growing up, because my dad always made us always do things. I always picked working with kids, and I always picked tutoring and things like that. And so it seemed like a natural fit, and I'm glad I picked it. Like, I wouldn't pick any other job. So
I wanted to be a dentist for 6 weeks. When I was at Aquinas, I found out, or it was like the discovery of, oh, I could work 4 days a week and have this phenomenal profession. And then I took biology 101, and I realized I am terrible at biology. Like,
I don't know if that was a good answer, but
that was good. Like, some days you wake up and you're like, yeah, okay, I got this, right? And then the day goes by and you're like, what a day.
Can you say hi to Brady for me?
I will. He's downstairs hiding. Hi, Peyton.
Hi.
Wesley is taking a nap for the first time in about 3 years. I don't know what's going on with him. Otherwise, he'd say hi too.
To me the other day, I go, hey, Skylar, you got to do homework after lunch. She looks at me, she goes, but Dad, that's when I'm teaching land and karate.
She has a schedule, and you're messing
Right?
with her.